Sleepwalk Saturday, which resulted basically in a bunch of near misses, and maybe you can only fully trust the dogs. The question is which pack? And prime time meets Pac-12 after dark. This is the College Game Day podcast for Monday, September 18th. Rece Davis and the great Pete Thamel back with us after being on assignment, covering the Caleb Williams story. Back in time for Pete, I think in my 9 years hosting College Game Day, that might have been as electric and an atmosphere with big stars, The Rock coming in, Deion Sanders. It was there were a lot of moving parts and a lot of energy in Boulder on Saturday morning. Did you have a good time?
I mean, Rece, from the backdrop, which people thought was fake, it was so beautiful, to the energy. I mean, sitting in the office and being like, oh, there's The Rock. Hello, Rock. How are you? Walking in, Pat had his show there on Friday, which was electric. He had Aaron Rodgers, Deion Sanders, and The Rock on his show, like to lead up into game day. Just unbelievable energy from the crowd, energy from the state. There is something to be said, and you noted this, when a former power feels it again, when there's a visceral energy to a revival. And that's exactly what that was on Saturday. It was the start of a revival, and the game met the moment too. I think that was one of the cool things, right? Like, the game was awesome.
It was, and here is where there are a couple of things about the game. Since you brought it up, the game spectacular, double overtime. Shedeur Sanders was absolutely brilliant after the punt pinned him back on the 2-yard line. But I do take issue with a couple of things in the way Colorado State went about their business. Now, I know that, I think Jay Norvell had put something on X, Twitter, whatever we're supposed to call it now, about the comment that I made in the media availability on Friday, that I didn't have a big problem with what he said about the hat and sunglasses, because I really didn't think it was directed at Deion Sanders. It was more sending the message to his team that they weren't going to be afraid. They weren't going to play second fiddle. They weren't coming in there to be fodder for the latest primetime moment, that they were there to fight and to win a football game. But apparently they took the fight a little too seriously. I thought the chippiness was overdone. It would also be disingenuous for me to say that I don't think that we are entirely blameless there, meaning all of us. Jay Norvell said it. Deion responded. We had an obligation to cover it. But I think we're mistaken if we say, hey, the Flames were fanned for 2 days. They're going to be – it's still their responsibility. But, we built that up and helped set the emotion on edge. So once that all settled down, though, Colorado State played with tremendous guts, daring, bravado, made plays for 58 minutes. And I know what you're going to say. They got down to 2 minutes left, 4th and 2, plus side of the field, barely, I think, or right around midfield. There's the moment. There's the moment you can finish and win the game. Now, I know what people are saying. Old school football, punt the ball, back them up, make them go the length of the field, and they did that perfectly. They put them down in the corner. And you had by the metrics, after that punt, a 98, 99% chance to win. But I'm going to tell you this, Pete Thamel. When you have a chance to deliver the knockout punch and end the game, swing. You're a 24-point underdog. Swing and finish them. And they didn't do it, and it cost them. Mostly because Shedeur Sanders was brilliant. I mean, his composure on the drive. I mean, he mentioned Brady afterwards, Tom Brady. I don't like to put anybody in that ethereal realm, but the way he handled that drive, I will say, was Brady-esque in terms of its calmness, composure, making the throws. He was terrific. That was a missed opportunity for all the bravado, then to come up there and say, I'm going to go old school football and punch you back. No. I thought they should have finished the deal. And I'll be honest, I was actually convinced of that by my son. We were watching the game together. He goes, they should try to finish them right here. Mm-hmm. I started thinking about it. And I was like, you know what? You're right. They should have.
Well, you like to say, Rece, styles make fights, and styles don't make statistics. So you may have a 98% chance of winning, when you look at all the calculations and win probability, and I love all that stuff, right? They don't take into account the tempo of offense that you run, the skill that you have, and they don't take account the quality of the quarterback in the connection with that skill. They don't take account that the defense stinks for
And was
Colorado State.
tired. Well,
So
and
yes,
hurt.
of
Tired
course.
and hurt.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. And, both sides, it was like walking wounded. So never in an environment like that, give them a chance to light the flame one more time. So I agree. And look, I thought Jay Norvell coached a heck of a football game for those 58 minutes. He had his team ready. He had his team on point. Coaches always say they were probably boiled a little bit over the edge as opposed to under the edge. And, certainly the hit on Travis Hunter was unforgivable. That should not have happened. Like, we throw guys out for like regular tackles, and that guy, I mean, it was not a head hunt, but it was a body hunt. And it was done on a guy who, quite frankly, Travis Hunter's a brilliant player. He's not a large human. Did you see him on the hook when you were in Boulder? Yeah. He is just he's a thin guy, and so it was clear. Did you see the replay, Rece, where they showed the pass go incomplete in front of the safety before he went and made the hit? Like, you could see that, like, he actually had a chance to like make a play at the ball. Now, he wouldn't have caught it, but he was not even looking at the ball. He was going, because he had to maneuver around his guy to lower his shoulder and to make that hit. So it was too bad. The pregame stuff, that's kind of fun and nostalgic.
Yeah,
and I don't get too caught up.
I'm talking about the penalties
pregame,
and the cheap shots. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was a dirty play. There was really no other way to say it. It was a dirty play by Henry Blackburn, the Colorado State safety, and there should not be a place for that in football. And it's just going to rob all of us of Colorado not being at their best for these next two games against Oregon and obviously the next big home game.
What is have you gotten word on precisely what the injury is yet to Travis Hunter?
They have not said the injury. It appeared to be some type of upper body shot, but I don't know if it's a rib. They have not said that. I imagine Deion talks Monday, and we'll get a little more insight onto that. But just the fact, first of all, he went back in, and then he had to go to the hospital. So obviously, just you hope a guy with a future that bright, comes back when he should. Right? No need to rush
but it was great theater, and the entire day was spectacular. I do wonder, and we'll delve into this a little bit more later in the week. I think reality is about to strike, to be honest. And we'll find out on Friday's podcast, but at the moment I'm laying them with this 3-touchdown favorite with Oregon and Eugene. As good as I think Colorado is in terms of their improvement, I'm not sure they're ready for that. But Oregon's going to have to play a clean game. If you give them a chance to believe, those dudes play hard, man. In Colorado, they play hard, and nothing but respect for that. Before we move on, one quick story about The Rock. Okay, so I had dinner.
Casual name drop.
No, I had dinner. Deal. Well, I'm going to really name drop here. I had dinner on Thursday night with the legendary sports information director at Colorado, Dave Platty. So we had nice dinner drop at Pasta J's, Big Bill Walton place. Recommend the shells. And I'm not even a big stuffed shells guy. I mean, I like them because I like all Italian food. Not a big stuffed shells guy. He didn't hesitate for 1 millisecond when I said, first time here, what should I get? Stuffed shells. And he was right. Absolutely spectacular. But I digress. So Platty, when he finds out about The Rock the next day, he texts me and he says, hey, this might be his first time here since the big fight. And in 93. So, obviously Dwayne Johnson was on that Miami team. So we dig up some footage, and we find not only the fight, which obvious when I think Keith Jackson said it was one of the biggest fights he'd ever seen in a college football game between Colorado and Miami. we see 94, Dwayne Johnson in the middle of it. And then we see this great tight shot of him helmet off, trying to look somebody up, hair flowing, big coiffure back then, just flowing in the breeze, looking like, nobody wanted to mess with him. So we thought this would be a fantastic surprise, just spring it on him, right? Well, the more we thought about that, I said to Jim Galliero, our producer, I said, you know what? I said, he's doing us a gargantuan solid coming in here, being a big part of the show. I said, I think he's going to be okay with it. Let's just go ask him. So I go over and, introduce myself. I had not met him prior to that. And, we small talk for a minute. And I said, hey, listen, you remember the fight? He goes, oh, yeah. He said, that was, one of the biggest ones ever. We got in a lot of fights that year. And I said, we found some great footage of it. You good with us bringing it up? And in pure superstar entertainer form, he goes, oh, yeah, we'll lean into it. It was phenomenal. I mean, he absolutely could not have been nicer, couldn't have been better. And it was great. And it was a great little old school moment there from the glory days for both Colorado and Miami. It also fit well into a segment we were doing about resurgent old powers.
The only thing more fun than seeing that video and seeing the guys react to it on the set, Rece, was watching you and Jim Galliero discover The Rock on the video in the office. There he is! There, look at his afro! Oh my God! He's so mad!
And then he told the story, which we touched on a little bit on the show, that I guess obviously not Ralphie. She was in her cage by then, but Chip the Buffalo, the guy in the mascot costume, I guess acted like he wanted some in the fight. and Rock, who at the time was, if I remember, didn't they call him Dewey back then? It was Dwayne Johnson. I think they might have called him Dewey, but that's neither here nor there. Huh. He said that he, at the time, whoever was in the Chip the Buffalo costume could not have known that he was challenging The Rock and was risking being on the business end of the people's elbow. And Rock said he was ready to chase him into the stands, which was just phenomenal. But it was an entertaining morning. Boulder showed up, and that's why I love this show, man, because you and I love this sport. And to see people excited about their team, wanting to showcase their university again, excited about a game, very little is better than that.
Oh, I mean, it was just, that show was pitch perfect, man. The setting was pitch perfect. The game was pitch perfect. I mean, so I live in South Boston, which isn't exactly the college football mecca of the world. And at the playground on Sunday morning, like the moms and dads, I overheard them talking about Colorado football. Now, if you had told me a year ago, people would have been talking about Colorado football. Like, it would have been probably because they lost 100-0. Like, there would just be no reason. So they have transcended. I heard a mom talking about, oh, I fell asleep in the game, but I watched it on TikTok. It was really exciting. Like, it's just like, that is just like, it's like the prime effect right there amid all the Lululemon and double strollers. So it was, it's just sort of like one of those like jolts where you're like, wow, this is a real living teaming thing.
One of the things I wanted to start doing on Monday on our edition of the podcast is coming up with some major takeaways, some obvious and some maybe a little bit off the radar. And I've got two of them. In addition, the first one we touched on with when you have a chance to finish the game, finish the game. That goes for a lot of teams. And Colorado State came up short there. Two other things that I take away from this past weekend, Pete, is I changed my number one vote in the AP poll from Florida State to Georgia. And you say, well, why Georgia? You had Georgia behind Michigan. Florida State won. They didn't look impressive. They were fortunate to escape against Boston College. When Georgia was challenged, Georgia shifted gears and basically said, nope, not going to happen. So when I was evaluating Sunday morning how to rank the teams, how to stack them up. Who do I trust to do that? Who do I trust now to totally finish the deal? Georgia, South Carolina's, a solid team, not a great team. So it's not like a big accomplishment, but they played great in the first half, and Georgia just slammed the door in the second. So I moved Georgia back to the top. I was prepared to move Texas to the top after thinking, that accomplishment against Alabama. But when you're tied 10-10 with Wyoming on the backside and you're throwing for 130 yards, I kind of left them where they were. And I don't think Michigan has accomplished enough to move up. So I went Georgia, Florida State, Michigan, Texas. And I moved Washington to 5 because I think Washington has a case for number 1. Washington is legit. I watched I've seen them, saw a good bit of the Boise State game, and saw the Michigan State game. I don't think Michigan State's great, but Washington is. I think Washington has a chance to be really, really great. That's one of the big takeaways I've got. The two teams right now that I trust, I still think Florida State might be the best, but the two teams I trust right now with the way they're playing, Georgia and Washington.
I feel like that Florida State game, Rece, especially because of the strip, scoop, score way that things turned and made it a game in the second half. I feel like every championship season has some great escape on the road in league play. It's just, if you look at the history of it all, remember Clint Stoner tripping and fumbling for Arkansas. You can go all the way through history, and you need to kind of figure out a way. You've got gusty winds from a hurricane. You got 3 starters out, and as much as Florida State showed some frailties, and I think their secondary should have some worries because Thomas Castellanos looked like Deshaun Watson, and that will be problematic if that continues for FSU on Saturday. But I don't think I'm just going to write them off as contenders because they struggled for a road league win. Now, did it expose some fissures? Sure. Did I think human nature set in a little bit in that game? Absolutely. But I don't think I just don't think it's some complete it wasn't some complete dumpster fire. They generally controlled that game through 3 quarters, and then it kind of unspooled on them a little bit at the end. I will say this: they better figure out how to stop a running quarterback, because that was a huge part of what BC did. And look, there's a couple generations of defensive coordinators trying to figure out how to stop running quarterbacks. It is the great equalizer in college football. But that was those are a couple of things about FSU that jumped out at me. I'm really excited for, and again, I'm not wishing away any weeks here, but Oregon, Washington, October 14th. That could be something. And I believe that game's in Seattle, right, Rece?
Yes.
Yeah. That's there's a good chance you and I could be trying to, or actually not you or I, because we wouldn't do it nearly as fun. Pat McAfee could be trying to catch some flounder at the fish market there in Seattle.
Have you seen the video of my hands grabbing fish on set the last time we were in Seattle? Oh yeah, hauled it in beautifully. They came up to the set. Up to the set.
Nice soft.
That's a real challenge, Pete, because if you get fish guts or fish juice on your suit, that's a problem. That's a smell problem.
Well, for you, it's especially a problem. We know how much you like to be well coiffed. Our listeners should know at like 3:58 in the morning, Rece Davis came down in the hotel for us to drive over to the set, and he looked like he was ready, like he was about to walk down the aisle and get married. I'm like disheveled. I looked like I'd been out in Boulder and like slept 90 minutes in my suit, and Rece is like, tie is like piercing his Adam's apple. It's so tight to his neck at 3:58 a.m. Like I wasn't sure if I was like, can you breathe? Is your tie like that tight?
I went out because I was so grateful to the kids who had come early at Colorado and took them donuts. Had these, big, several dozen Dunkin' Donuts, and took them out there and were passing them out. And one of the kids knocked over the box, and I was like, not the suit, dude, not the suit. Just protect the suit. And I probably, as I do on this podcast, as you know, I probably got a little carried away when I said that I trust Georgia and Washington. I want to be clear. I do still trust Florida State. I think what I was getting at was that I have preached for years in terms of rankings. September, particularly, needs to be extraordinarily fluid so that you're not trying to validate predictions. You're reflecting what you see. What I saw from Florida State the first 2 weeks moved them to number one. I think that performance was significant enough to drop them a little last week. I still trust them, and I can't fathom them winning at Clemson Saturday and me not putting them back at number one. I know Clemson might not be 2018 Clemson, but that's probably what will happen depending on how they play. But I really make an attempt, Pete, to be fluid early and move teams around. I haven't looked to see where, for instance, I have Alabama ranked as opposed to everyone else. I have them at 21. They're a mess right now. It's fluid. If they look better the next couple of weeks with their talent, obviously they're going to shoot back up. So I try to move teams around. I've moved Washington ahead of Ohio State, and I sort of feel like that the rows versus columns thing. They make you rank them in a column, so it seems like there's this big gap. But I think my overall point was I have Washington and maybe Ohio State, depending on what we see on Saturday. But I have Washington in that row of the 5 teams now that I think are all pretty much the same and could be shuffled in any way you see fit from week to week. I have one other big takeaway that's a little bit more off the radar from a team that lost. You might have heard me say this before. It's not against the rules to improve. We get an idea of what a player or what a team is, and we don't want to vary from that. We want to say, that's what you are. And so this narrative started, perhaps with somewhat deservedly so, when Spencer Rattler left Oklahoma, that he was about him, that he was maybe not the toughest guy in the world, that, he wasn't a team guy, that he wasn't a leader. You know what I saw Saturday afternoon in Athens? I saw a dude that has matured, changed. He's legit, man. He's tough. He's a leader, and he played his butt off. I don't care that there weren't great stats in the second half. He threw a couple of picks. They were all over him, and my man never flinched. Good for him, because he's a dude. And I'm not saying first round. If that's the Spencer Rattler I'm getting, I'll take him on an NFL team. I'll take that because he's got the arm. He's got the arm talent. And I think the other things around him from outside perspective, I think he's fixed him, and good for him, because I thought he played his butt off Saturday and fought to the very end.
Yeah, you think about the amount he got hit in that Carolina game and the pressure he was under on Saturday. I thought Gary Danielson at the end of that game made a great point. He said, this is exactly what Kirby Smart wanted. He wanted to win, but he wanted to see his team, in moments of duress in the second half of a close game. And I think we saw Carson Beck flatlined in a great way, right? Like, he didn't get too high or too low. You didn't see him get the yips or get antsy. And you saw what is, I think, defined Georgia in this back-to-back championship run. They just leaned in and exerted their physical dominance in the second half. And you can't, that doesn't matter when you're up 42-0 against Ball State, right? That only matters when you are grinding out drives and you've got a 3rd and 4 and you need to push. And I think the moments of adversity that they faced, they handled well. So that was a nice win there for Kirby to get a win, but still learn a little bit about his team and get some actual development. Because as we've said, the tests, especially in this SEC, Rece, are going to be few and far between. I'll be really curious this weekend. We'll get to it about what Ole Miss really is in Tuscaloosa, because that is Georgia's biggest regular season test.
So now you think that's a bigger test than Tennessee is going to be on the road based on what you saw from the Vols in the swamp?
I do. Again, we still have a lot to learn about Ole Miss, but I think I have a little more faith in Ole Miss scoring than Tennessee right now. And when that offense, that Baylor offense, what Josh Heupel runs, when you have the right pieces in place, like Colorado has the right pieces in place right now, that is a thing of beauty. When something's a little bit off, the O-line's a little thin, the skill can't quite stretch the field, you can't go vertical, horizontal the way you want, it can be a pretty choppy ride. And Georgia, as we saw last year at field level, Rece, can pressure the quarterback to disrupt timing, disrupt tempo, and really, just they can turn an orchestra into a garage band pretty fast. So I really feel like, yes, I want to see more from Tennessee, but that certainly was a fairly what do you say, ungood? Is that your term,
ungood.
Reese? They were
ungood performance.
They were ungood on offense. They wasted timeouts. They were just, the operation wasn't smooth in that thing. So again, they have time to get better. They have younger players. I think Joe Milton started now 10 or 11 games, but the receivers just aren't guys who've gotten touches. So, and they don't have, if that offense doesn't have a guy who can bust the top off the defense, it can struggle, because you can put that offense in a box a little bit. And so far, I have not seen a player like Hyatt, or a player like who's the kid from Vegas? He was a 3rd round pick.
Cedric Tillman.
Cedric Tillman. Sorry. Cedric Tillman was a top breaker. Jalen Hyatt was a top breaker from the slot, which gives that offense like an extra gear. They don't seem to have that downfield dynamism right now.
And on the subject of Ole Miss, and I want to look back mostly on Monday, and we're going to have Ryan McGee join us in just a second. But Ole Miss, Alabama this week, LSU next week. Ole Miss could be the team to beat in the SEC West, and a commanding lead in the SEC West by the end of the month. I mean, think about that for a second. And they still haven't, I know Quinshon Judkins played against Georgia Tech, but he still really hasn't gotten loose. I looked this up yesterday, Pete. He doesn't have a run longer than 13 yards this season. Last year, he was 3rd in the nation with 19 carries of 20 yards or longer. So they still haven't unleashed the full force of him being completely healthy. And Jackson Dart, the USC transfer, has been really good, and then ran the ball really well against Georgia Tech on Saturday night too.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I was a little surprised they played Judkins, and that's no disrespect to Georgia Tech, but you've got better personnel than them. They've got 3 better quarterbacks than Georgia Tech has. So you would think they would be able to save him a little bit. Now again, he didn't get a ton of carries.
Yeah,
Reese, would he have 13 for 37?
I think that sounds about right.
Yeah, and he had a touchdown. But yeah, he needs to be a bell cow for them to go win in Tuscaloosa. I think that goes without saying. I don't know if they have the outside skill that they've had the last 5-6 years to really test that Alabama secondary the way that Texas tested it. So, what do you think of DC Gate, Reese?
I don't know. The implication from Lane Kiffin that Kevin Steele, who's the defensive coordinator who has returned to Alabama, is not really making defensive calls and is just there mentoring, leading, overseeing Travaris Robinson, I guess. Or, is the implication. I'm not really sure why it matters, other than this. Lane Kiffin said it yesterday so that Nick Saban would have to answer questions about it today. That's the only reason it really matters, right?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No. It was a complete Kiffin ploy, straight from his grab bag. One theory I did see posited on Twitter this morning is that T-Rob may have been calling it just because Alex Golesh's offense, the same one that was at Tennessee, the Josh Heupel offense, the Baylor offense, calls things so fast that they might have just had Travaris Robinson calling it from the sideline just to speed up the operation because I assume Steele's in the box.
Yeah,
is that right?
I think
Rece?
so. I'd have to look to
Yeah.
make sure, but I believe
So
he is. I think he's in the box.
yeah, but you don't have a lot of time to get your
Right.
calls in at that point. So there was shots of him holding a card up, and that just may have been just to streamline the operation more than I would be pretty stunned if Nick Saban stripped Kevin Steele of defensive coordinator things. But that said, that's seemingly the way the operation worked
Can
on
I
Saturday.
say this? And I'm not in the meetings. I don't know, and I'm going to be speaking out of school a little bit, but podcasts are about making definitive statements. There is no way that happened. Not what you're saying. There's no way that in reaction to Texas, for instance, that Kevin Steele was stripped of play call. Come on. That's incomprehensible to me that would happen. I don't see it. Now, maybe there's something that's gone on over the course of the year where Kevin is mentoring T-Rob. Maybe it was simply because of the speed of the operation with the way Golish runs his offense. Maybe it was speed of the operation as they prepare for the meeting with Tennessee coming up in a few weeks when they'll see a similar style, if not outright copy of the offense.
Which is an interesting thing,
so,
right? Like, let's do something different because we failed so badly last year. Let's try a different operation and give it a test run in Tampa for when we do play them.
Maybe so. And there are a lot of other interesting things that occurred in that game. We can review with the great Ryan McGee, who is about to join us in just a moment. It's brought to you by Dr. Pepper. It ain't college football season without the delicious taste of an ice cold Dr. Pepper, the one fans deserve. Ryan, how are you? Recovered? Is there any emotional scarring from the latest trip to the swamp, which turned out for Tennessee the way most trips to the swamp seem to?
22 years of trips to the swamp, or 22 years with alternate trips to the swamp. Yeah, and no. The good news is we thought initially that we were going to do Marty McGee from Gainesville, and then we decided to instead go to Starkville, and that probably prevented me from it certainly prevented me from having to watch Tennessee lose again at Florida, but it also prevented me from having to answer phone calls from my in-laws and college roommates of why couldn't I do something to help Tennessee while I was there. So instead, I was in Starkville with the Cowbells.
You could have blown the top off from the slot like Jalen Hyatt, right?
Yeah, no, it was well, it is interesting, and you guys certainly experienced this too. But my college roommates and my in-law, they really believe that I have some effect on everything. Like could you not tell Josh Heupel to do so and so, or Butch Jones, or go down the list? Could you not have told so and so to do so and so? No, I could not have, and they would not have listened. So, but yeah, it's I was good. I had a great Saturday. The Cowbells were amazing. It wasn't The Rock. That looked pretty ridiculous, but it was a good time nonetheless in Stark Vegas.
I had a text exchange with Bill Connolly yesterday, and saying that I didn't really think that there were any significant upsets on Saturday. He differed with that. He thought Florida over Tennessee and his beloved Missouri Tigers over Kansas State. A couple of road games, home team won. Tennessee is clearly jinxed there. So at least for the time being, it's one of those things that when Tennessee wins at Florida, they're not going to win on a field goal. They're probably going to win like 38-7 or something like that, and just exercise all the demons at one time. But for all of the near misses and for all of the sleepwalking at the top, and for Florida State, to be challenged, for Texas to be tied with Mustard, early in the fourth quarter, and if not for a missed tackle, that game might have stayed close for much longer. Nothing really happened at the end of the day. And I don't count Tennessee losing at Florida and K-State biting it on a 61-yard field goal as being, some massive ground-shaking upset.
It reminded me of week 4 a year ago, which is kind of what I'm looking at, looking toward week 4 this year, which is, everyone, the teams with the numbers next to their names, for the most part, a year ago, week 4 won, But, Georgia was pushed into halftime by Kent State, and Michigan, was uncomfortable with Maryland. And, there were a lot of those games where, I remember USC, I think, barely got by Oregon State. And so the teams that won the games, that should have won the games, but they didn't feel very comfortable doing it. And so that was kind of that's what Saturday felt like. I felt the same way. I kept waiting on, like the South Carolina Georgia game. It was super uncomfortable for Georgia, but they won the game. And they certainly didn't. I thought 27 points was way too big of a spread, because I think South Carolina's better than people realize. But that to me, that kind of summed the weekend up, which is the teams that won for the most part won. That should have won, but they just weren't very comfortable doing it, which was a little bit of a wake up call. And that's kind of I expect to see more of that this weekend.
It's human nature. It's college football. We've seen it forever. The NFL is just win in advance, but because of the small field that makes the postseason and because of the ranking system and everything, there's the emphasis on how did you look, because you have to find some way to differentiate among these teams who are largely indistinguishable. So I just didn't, and I don't think that the two teams, even though I was probably a little higher on Tennessee in the preseason than some, was surprised, taken aback by just how the operation went. But, I didn't think it was some affront because Florida was desperate too. That's the other part of it, is that if Florida loses that game to Tennessee, particularly if they get handled or if they look sloppy the way they did against Utah, then that thing is going to start unraveling because the Bull Gators are going to be unhappy. And so, there were a lot of emotional things that factored into that. And I would even say the same might be true for Missouri. They have an offensive guy running the show, and their offense hasn't been any good. They have this 5-star receiver, and they can't really get him loose, at least last year. And, they got drilled by Kansas State a year ago. So can they put something together? They did. And Kansas State is, they have a lot of guys back, but they're not quite what they were last year too. So I think we had a lot of threats. We had a lot of great moments. We had a lot of discomfort, as you said, but at the end, not a lot changed except this. Now, Pete touched on what Lane Kiffin had to say. I wish I had the number in front of me, but it is a relatively common occurrence for a preseason top 10 team to finish the season unranked. We're going to find out a lot this week about whether that team is very likely to be Alabama. And, people say, well, that's panic. It's one loss and a little hangover and trying to get something going and a really bad performance. There are a lot of earmarks there of discontent. We'll put it that way on the offensive side of the ball. Defense, the defense played hard, especially late. Not that the offense didn't play hard. They just didn't play well. And it didn't seem like that there was a belief on that side of the ball. And I think those are some warning signs that of what might be to come over the next few weeks for the Crimson Tide.
Yeah, and I think it's like that for everyone, because when you get to the end of September, and the first day of fall is Saturday, right? And so fall has arrived, and the question is, who are we? And if you get to week 4, the end of week 4, and you're still not 100% sure who you are, then you're in trouble. At this point, you should know who you are. I don't know if Alabama knows who they are. I would give Mississippi State. So I saw Mississippi State in person on Saturday. I think Zach Arnett has done an incredible job in an impossible situation replacing Mike Leach. They don't know who they are. He has put in this entirely different offense because he's a defensive coordinator, and he thought the air raid put too much of a strain on his defense. And they're out there trying to outmuscle LSU. Well, LSU, I feel like, is starting to figure out who they are. They certainly look like it when I saw them on Saturday. Mississippi State doesn't know who they are yet. Tennessee, they know who they are, but they haven't been that yet. So I think we're at that point where who are we? It's time for some self-awareness and some self-identification. And I don't, it's not been, certainly not been for a decade and a half that we've gotten into the end of September where I don't know if Alabama is 100% sure who they are. They know who they want to be. but I'm not sure that they can be that. So it's again, when we hit week 4, week 5, it's the great philosopher, right? With the Arizona Cardinals, they are who we think they are. Well, we don't know who you think you are yet, and you either know now or you don't, and it's this is the time, and I think a lot of teams when they get on the other side of week 4 are going to realize this just wasn't going to be our year. Let's start thinking about next year.
Am I crazy that in a monsoon, I was stunned that Nick Saban just didn't put in Jalen Milroe and lean into the identity he'd wanted all year, which was to let this offensive line, which I think at this point is underachieved, right? Like that has not been the identity. That was the alleged identity, but I haven't seen it yet. USF had 5 sacks. Like that's, again, they have so many new players in the portal. It's hard to like say what the USF defense is, but they shouldn't have 5 sacks against Alabama, right? So like, why wasn't it just let's become bulldozers and move on? I'd be curious who you two would start against Kiffin on Saturday.
Swing, Ryan. I've got some thoughts on this.
No, I'm curious. Speaking of in-laws and roommates, I'm curious to hear what you have to say because I want to see if your phone starts ringing before you finish.
First of all, now I want to offer the disclaimer at the top. I've got no inside information on this whatsoever about what went into the decision other than Milroe's performance against Texas. If you read between the lines of some Saban news conferences leading up, I'm not sure that they got the reaction post-game and early part of the week from Milroe that perhaps they had hoped. I don't know that that's the case. That's just my guess because of what you said, Pete, because it seemed like the situation to just go ahead and do that. It brought to mind a pretty famous story in Alabama circles of when A.J. McCarron came to Alabama. I think it was A.J.'s freshman year. And after practice, A.J., who's no shrinking violet, even in front of Nick Saban, and went storming up after a practice into the office, absolutely furious by the fact that he had spent the entire practice with the threes. Just furious. Goes up, ticked off, brings it to the boss. And Saban's response was, today was a test in leadership and you flunked. Now, I don't know that was the case with Jalen Milroe because I thought his body language on the sideline was, at least what I saw. I didn't watch every second of that game. That was too painful to watch every second. But there were some clips of when Ty Simpson led the touchdown drive decisively, that Milroe was out there to greet him and gave him a big hug. So I could be 1,000% off base with that. I want to offer that. But it had the earmarks of something like that because what you said, Pete, stands to reason. So to answer the question directly about who I would start, most of it would depend on practice the first couple of days this week and who performs better. But my inclination is this. If your offensive line is going to be hit or miss, as it has been for Alabama up to this point, then I would go with the quarterback most likely to make explosive plays, even if I have to live with some mistakes. I would try to do what I could to mitigate the mistakes and still have the threat of a big play because they didn't feel like they had much of a threat of a big play certainly not with Buckner, who I felt badly for, because it didn't seem like everybody was rallying around him, just to put it frankly. And Simpson is talented, but still getting there. I'd probably go Milroe. It would depend on the first couple of practices and realize we're probably going to have some mistakes. Let's try to limit the catastrophic ones, but we also are probably going to get some big plays because they even got that against Texas. So that's what I would do. But nobody ever calls to consult me on such things. But most of it would depend on how the rest of the team responds to the quarterback first couple of days in practice.
Yeah, and I'm with you on all this. And I go back to talking about Tennessee. I go back to the stories that we've heard about Joe Milton. who transfers to Tennessee and lost a starting job. But the question was, how was he going to handle that? And the reality is he's the starter at Tennessee now because of how he handled losing the starting job. I mean, he's got the YouTube arm and the TikTok, and it throws it 90, Uncle Rico throwing over the mountains. I get all that stuff. But at the end of the day, he was always going to be the starter whenever Hendon Hooker was done because of how he interacted and his relationship with Hendon Hooker while he wasn't playing. You go back and watch film, every time Hendon Hooker stepped off the field, Joe Milton was the first one he talked to, not the coaches. And on the flip side, after Hooker was hurt, that's exactly what happened with Milton and Hooker. He walked off the field and found Hendon, and they talked first before he talked to any of the coaches and got on the headset. And so that's the question, is how do you handle it to the point of your story? How do you handle it when you don't have the job? And I think Milroe's the guy. I think Milroe's the guy long term. I think everyone agrees on that. But, and there's a point where you got to put him out there and see how he reacts, but also how does he react when he's not on the field? And so, yeah, I think he's the guy, unless, as we speak, they're getting ready for practice and it just doesn't go very well. But I think he's the guy you pin it on because he was always going to be the guy.
Do you think this is the quarterbacks of this generation grew up watching the Hurts to Tua handoff at the halftime of that title game? Do you think that is inherent in their sideline behavior, knowing that is like the ultimate show of backup sportsmanship, right? And look where Jalen Hurts is right now. So I just wonder if that, the inherent human reaction to be pouty or to be moody or to be unhappy is tempered by the fact of, wait a minute, Jalen Hurts handled this first class. Like, why shouldn't we need to do the same thing? That is like the North Star, I would think, for backup quarterback or benched quarterback behavior.
No, the night Jalen Hurts won me, and I always liked him, but the night Jalen Hurts won me was that night because I was in the locker room. I mean, almost there illegally before the doors were open. And Hurts came to his locker, and I was the first one standing there. And the way that he handled that night, I was like, all right, I don't know where this guy's going to play next year. I don't know where he's going to play 5 years from now, but he'll be playing football. Because the way he handled that night and knowing how much his heart was hurting, that was the night he won me over. And it's why he's still one of my favorite athletes I've covered in college, and it's why I enjoy watching him. Yeah, which, by the way, that's part of Alabama's problem too is, I mean, Sunday Night Football, I was sitting there watching, I'm watching two Alabama quarterbacks, who at one point were in the same meeting room, and here they are playing in Sunday night. And while we're waiting to watch Jalen Hurts play, it's just, that's part of the problem too, is there was going to be a drop off. There's no way. And that on top of, the quality control problems we talked about, they're a little spoiled. And so it's gonna take a beat, but that was the night Hurts won me, and it's the night Milton won me. When I watched him interacting with Hooker before and after Hooker was hurt. So yeah, we'll have to see what happens going forward.
There's also another dynamic, Pete, and you might be plugged into this because you do such a great job in knowing recruits and their makeup and their background and everything. Ty Simpson was a 5-star quarterback, and I think there has been some frustration from him. It may be, I don't know his makeup, but he wouldn't be unique if he were a quarterback who performs better when they tell him you're the quarterback. Now, most do, some don't. But if they've made a decision in the second half of that game to go with him this week, then you might see improved performance from him. So I think there are a lot of things on the table, and that's why I don't know what the number is. I think the number was 6.5. I keep giving all of this foreshadowing from what I'm going to do Saturday. I mean, I'm absolutely taking Ole Miss with the better quarterback and the momentum in 6.5. I mean, there's no question about that.
They have 3 better quarterbacks,
right?
Rece, I think.
Yeah. I mean, maybe the freshman you wait and see. Spencer Sanders. I'm still. I guess there were some NIL things or whatever. I'm still a little incredulous that he went there, but I was kind of. I wouldn't say I was chief on the Jackson Dart fan club train, but I was certainly aboard. And when he went there, I was like, Well, I don't think that's a guarantee you're going to start there. And so I was a little surprised that was a choice he made, but I don't know the background to that. If there was NIL consideration or if there were other factors involved that led him to make that choice when he left Oklahoma State.
Well, what a great decision it was to get out of that
Oh,
tire
my
fire.
goodness.
Hey, but what strikes me now, though, is everything's an audition, right? The way it works now is, like, we're talking about how guys handle being benched, or how guys handle when they're hurt, or how guys handle when they sign in a place that's already had. We talked about Brandon Stewart and Peyton Manning just last week, when guys sign and all of a sudden they're in a meeting room with 3 other All-Americans. I remember Jim Valvano talking about after the great 83 championship year, they didn't even make the NCAA tournament the next year. And the reason was because he said he looked down the bench, and the year before he had no McDonald's All-Americans, and now he had 5 on the bench. And he's like, how do I handle this, and how do they handle it? And none of them handled it very well. Now, because of transfer portal and because of 24-hour coverage that we're giving everybody and speculation and whatever else, everything's an audition, because how you handle your business now is Spencer Rattler, right? Spencer Rattler got pegged as a difficult locker room guy and didn't handle this well and didn't handle that well. And as a result, a lot of schools wouldn't look at him when it came to transfer. I never agreed with that. I mean, my interactions with him have never been evidence of that. But it reminds me, everything's an audition. I mean, people are constantly watching how you handle everything all the time, even more so now than it's ever been, because you don't know where you're going to be next year, right? I mean, it's, we got a quarterback at Rice that started at 17 different schools in the last 7 years. It's just, but the reality is
he's kind of balling out too, by the way.
But you don't know where you're going to be, and you don't know where you're going to be within your own program, let alone maybe next year being somewhere else. So it just strikes me that you're always on, like you're always on, and you have to be. And it's fascinating to me. They're grown men now. They're not 19.
I try to avoid using the term kids. Sometimes I slip and do, but they're adults. They're young adults. They're still maturing adults. They're not finished product. Heck, I'm 57. I'm not a finished product. At least I hope I'm not. So things happen and change, but they're not little kids, especially in this era of it being big business, of them being able to negotiate their way into and out of schools, for lack of a better way to put it. They're men, they're adults, young adults, but they're not little kids, and we shouldn't treat them as such. And I'm glad to hear you echo my sentiments on Spencer Rattler, which I told Pete earlier. I thought that was one of the big takeaways of the weekend. I mean, his reputation was not sterling, and I don't know why it wouldn't be now. I mean, he's shown a lot.
Yeah. And it reminds me, I'm not a Game of Thrones guy, but it reminds me of that gif you always see of the one guy from Game of Thrones who's pulling the sword out and the army's running at him with about 10,000 bad guys. And that's how I felt watching Spencer Rattler when I was at the North Carolina, South Carolina game. It's how I felt watching Spencer Rattler, against Georgia over the weekend. That guy can play, man. But he is never, from the time I dealt with him in Oklahoma, to certainly, I mean, I've talked to him a lot since he got to Columbia, and I see no evidence of this. Mm-hmm. Now, is he cocky? 100%. He's a quarterback.
Find a quarterback that's not, or at least a good one,
right? Exactly. But he still carries with him a reputation that he earned for better or for worse on Netflix. He does. And but at the end of the day, and quite frankly, the water was poisoned against him when he was leaving Oklahoma. But yeah, for these kids, I just said, for them to handle what they're handling, I think about me when I was 19, and I couldn't make a 905 class. Couldn't do it. Couldn't get up. And so to see what they handle on a daily basis is just it's remarkable, and it's certainly way more complicated now than it even was 3 years ago.
This has been a great review, and this is going to be a tremendous week of college football coming up. Woo. Can't wait to dive into that. We'll do so in a minute. Ryan, always great talking to you. Thanks for stopping by, buddy.
All right, boys. Appreciate it.
After exhaustive research, I can't find, as we had last year, the quintessential dumb loses more than smart wins. But I did find a series of possessions that can show you how to squander a game. Vanderbilt UNLV, after Vanderbilt jumps to a 17-0 lead, they go fumble, return for a touchdown, punt, interception, fumble. And then they lose on a late field goal. So I would say, I don't know if that's dumb for a smart school, but it is certainly not strategically advantageous to do it that way. But this is what I really wonder. Pete, last week on Friday, because you were on assignment and working harder than the rest of us, you sent in your picks over the phone. Taylor delivered those picks as you. What did you think of Taylor's performance portraying the authority, Pete Thamel?
I thought he did a really good job. I want you to know, because there was an undertone of like, are we offending Pete too much? No. I was not offended. I want to be very clear about that. I am a proud Northeastern. The only thing that offended me was Taylor said I was an aspiring Southerner. I love the South. We visit there often. I don't aspire to live there. That's all. So that was the only thing I took slight umbrage with, and I say that obviously joking. Proud of my Northeast roots, but other than that, it was fairly accurate. As Taylor said, the rules of podcasts are when one goes away, one's chops will get busted, and mine were busted. I thought definitely. I could tell towards the end of the podcast, Rece started to feel bad because he really thought it was funny, but Rece is such a nice guy that if he's going to insult you or say something critical of you, he has to compliment you twice. So I felt like it was almost a 4-to-1 ratio by the end because he just felt so bad. But he didn't want the bit to end because it was a good bit. So he was pretty tortured.
It was hilarious. And Pete mocks me in the office all the time. If I say something nice, but we've got to know each other well enough now that he knows the tone. He goes, "Oh, here it comes. Second compliment coming. Now here comes what he really wants to talk about." But here's the real question I did have. Of the people that Taylor dug deep into the roster to find as these fake sources that you had to give you insight into the game, how many of them did you actually know? Did some names ring a bell?
So certainly. So the funny one was that he mentioned in an attempt at obscurity, Chili Davis, who's the assistant special teams coach at K-State. I actually know Chili. He was at FAMU with Willie Simmons before that. So when he said his name, I was like, oh man, Chili's going to think I'm like he's getting dimed out on our podcast, like for giving me K-State scoops. So that is not the case. But I do know him a bit. I believe Del McGee came up. I obviously have been around and know Del McGee a bit just from over the years. He's a linchpin on that Georgia staff, really the associate head coach, great, well-known coach. And there was one other one who I did. Jamarcus Shepard. I've known Jamarcus forever. He was at Purdue. He's a receivers coach at Washington now. So those are the ones off the top of my head. He did go deep though. Like when you're talking about the assistant psychology performance director, even
that was my favorite.
Yes, no, it was very funny. You could tell he was feeling that he was owning the bit, so he kept digging like a little deeper as it went on. So it was good work.
It was an impressive performance by a man who later would be playing really hurt.
Ooh, yeah. We got we haven't put the breaking news on that one yet.
Taylor, do you have an injury update status for our podcast roster with you? What's your injury status right now?
I'm day to day right now with a broken foot, 3 broken metatarsals, and might have to take some time this week to take care of it. But we're in the middle of the season, boys, so I'm still gonna be on the bench clapping. I'm gonna be in film study. We're gonna be present, and we've got goals to accomplish still.
Greeting us when we come off the mic as Jalen Hurts or Jalen Milroe would, right?
Absolutely.
That's your goal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Team player over here.
Well, I tell you what, the one thing I learned from that is that it's going to take a lot to get me off of this podcast because I'm going to get destroyed the second that happens. Thanks for listening to the College Game Day Podcast Week in Review. We'll turn our attention on Wednesday to this unbelievable slate of games as we head to South Bend for College Game Day for Ohio State and Notre Dame. They don't play that often. We should cherish it when they do, and we will. We'll make some picks. Hope you'll subscribe to the podcast. That's the easiest way to make sure that you never miss an episode. Winds up right on your device, and you can listen as you're recovering, letting your metatarsals recover if that is the case for you, which I certainly hope it's not. Taylor, we hope you get well. You know you will. Pete, great to have you back. And we will talk again Wednesday. Thanks for listening, everybody.